Hi everyone, welcome to the Teaching and Active Learning in Blackboard Collaborate Ultra workshop. My name is Colin Walker. I teach in the Mass Media program here at Valdosta State University, but I'm also serving as an interim training specialist for CELT and the Center for eLearning. By the end of this webinar, faculty will be able to describe the effective technology for teaching with Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, identify strategies for virtual classroom management, differentiate strengths and weaknesses of active learning tools and teaching techniques for engaging students with Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, and finally present compelling content in Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. So for this workshop, you will need a few tools available to you. First off, a desktop or laptop computer would be extremely helpful. I would not recommend trying to do this on a tablet. However, it is possible if need be. You also need a working internet connection, something that's going to be stable so that you get the highest quality experience possible. And then you'll want to work with an existing Blackboard Collaborate Ultra session. If you haven't used Blackboard Collaborate Ultra before as an instructor, I will show you how to do that in this next slide. For those of you who are already experienced with the tool and know how to create a session, go ahead and open that up, and then you can fast forward past the next slide. So let's go over the basics of how to create a Blackboard Collaborate Ultra session. So you'll see here I'm in my sandbox right now. Every course is going to look similar to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find Course Builder. Next, I need to add a link to the course. Before you do all of this, there has to be a module for the Collaborate Ultra session to go to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this icon right here for Create a Link. And I'm going to go to Testing Tools. What I will do next is I'm going to click on External Learning Tools because that's where Collaborate Ultra falls under. I'm going to select Collaborate Ultra Preferred. And then you'll notice you can give a name. So I'm going to call this Collaborate Ultra Example for Workshop. And then press Save. Right there, you've now created a Blackboard Collaborate Ultra workshop. And if you want it published, you can choose that right here. So I'm going to navigate back to my course home. I'm going to click on Testing Tools and scroll down, and there you see it. So this is what the student would see when they try to log in. We'll click that, and then you're going to notice you get this scrolling wheel, and then Collaborate Ultra is going to begin. So we're going to create a session. I'm going to call this Blackboard Collaborate Ultra Workshop. You can set a start and an end date. However, I'm going to leave this as an open session. This is going to make it so that I can come and go whenever I please. This might be a strategy actually to use for your students. You'll see the early entry time. You can also provide guest access as well. Okay, and then you also have session settings that can be decided later on as well, but we'll talk about more of that in just a little bit. I'm going to click Create, and then I'm going to click Join. If you've made it this far, you've now successfully created a Collaborate Ultra session. Feel free to pause, rewind, and go over these steps. If you need additional assistance or step-by-step videos, I provided a link in BlazeView 101 for you all. We are going to begin this workshop by discussing strategies for virtual classroom management. So now let's talk about hardware testing when it comes to using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. So I would always recommend to keep a session available 24/7. You can do this with any existing session by clicking over here on these three dots, and then you're going to notice Edit Settings. When you get there, you can then create an open session by checking No End. However, if you do want to have time constraints, you can set both dates and times for both the start and the end. I would always recommend having an early entry time of at least 15 minutes. This allows your students to get into the room before class time. This way you do not lose any time when it comes to working with your class. And finally, we want to remind you all that you're not instructional tech support. If you have any tech problems related to Blackboard Collaborate Ultra and or embedding it in BlazeView, you can contact the Center for eLearning. Their email is blazeview@valdosta.edu, or you could call them at 229-245-6490. And you'll also see that a link to eLearning and their Contact Us page is also posted here for your information. So I want to provide one additional teaching tip when it comes to hardware testing. And in this one, I'm thinking about the students and your work with them. So during the first week of class, you probably want to make sure that your students can access Collaborate Ultra successfully. Please keep in mind that students don't have access to their BlazeView course shells until the semester begins. So I would recommend doing this early in the first week. So in one instance, you could maybe ask your students to log into the session and then write a message to you as the instructor. So on the right-hand side of the screen here, this represents a student view inside of Collaborate Ultra. So, as the student, I'm going to click on the Blackboard Collaborate Ultra workshop, and I'm going to click Join Session. The nice part here is that you do not need to stay in the chat room the entire time. As long as there's a 24/7 session going, then you don't need to worry about that. So it's going to ask the student if they can access the microphone. I'm going to click Allow. Okay, you'll notice that my camera as the instructor is not on. If it were, you would see my video actually appear on the student's screen on the right-hand side. As you will see here. So you'll see a lot of videos start popping up. My student's camera is not on, but if it were, you would see this. And you're going to notice two very different views of me. But I'm going to turn that off to avoid any confusion on the student side. Okay, so we asked our students, and I'm going to turn off my camera right now too. So we asked our students to send a message directly to us as the instructor. So they're going to click on this purple tab down here to show what's available. And for find someone to chat with, I would tell them to type in my name. So Colin Walker. I click on that, and then now I can send a message directly to the instructor as the teacher. No one else can see this. So I will say, "Hi, Dr. Walker. I successfully accessed the Collaborate Ultra workshop session." Smiley face. Click Enter. And notice, as the instructor, I am going to receive a notification. And you may say, well, what happens if I'm not live? Or if the student's not live? So first, if I have the student leave, I will click Leave Session, as you see on the right-hand side. And you'll notice that is going to stay there, that chat message. So this is one nice feature when it comes to using Collaborate Ultra Workshop. So let's speak about some different virtual classroom strategy tools. So first off, I would always recommend asking your students to mute their mics upon entering a class session. So for them to do that, you just need to show them that when they enter a class session, and you see Join Session on the right-hand side of the screen, it's going to ask them to access their microphone, which you do want to tell them to click Allow. All they need to do if they want to unmute or mute their microphone, to unmute, they're going to click on the microphone icon, as you see here. And then when the white box is through it, the white line is through the symbol, you'll notice that the microphone is muted. I'm not going to keep the mic open because that would create a large feedback loop given the recording environment that we are currently in. I would always recommend to tell the students to keep their mics off unless they are speaking. You as the instructor are going to want to leave your microphone on, as you would see here, so on the left-hand side of the screen. But once again, I'm going to turn this off so that we do not have a feedback loop that forms. Feedback is very bad, and it's going to be painful for your students and yourself in some instances. Okay, I would always recommend keeping your video on as the instructor. If you need to turn your video off for any reason, make sure to put some sort of graphic on the screen for your students. You don't want to think that you just left them, even though you may have to quiet a dog who's barking or maybe go take care of something really quickly. So next, you want to show a welcome message that's going to encourage your students to participate. So one way of doing this is maybe use the whiteboard. So to find the whiteboard, you're going to go to Share Content. And you can share a blank whiteboard. So you see that's going to appear on the right-hand side of the screen, so this represents the student view. So I might write in there, welcome to Blazeview Collaborate Ultra Training 101. And then maybe give them a prompt. Maybe change the color. Tell me your level of experience with this platform on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 meaning that you've never used it, and 10 meaning that you're an expert. Okay, and then I can make a quick adjustment here using a little pointer. Could rotate it. As you can see, I'm really just trying to expand the box. Okay, so you see that there, and that's how your students can see a message from you. And then in that instance, they could start sending you chat messages. So for example, if I'm the example student, I could send a message in the everyone chat saying, I'm an expert. So I'm going to give it 10. And then it's also going to pop up there and everybody else can see it. So that's something that you do need to explain to your students, that if they do type in the everyone chat, then everybody can see their message. So there's going to be some instances where they may want to contact you as the instructor and not everybody right away. Okay, so this is a way to just get people to participate really quickly in class. Another method that you could try is playing some music. I prefer film scores, and that's probably because I teach in a media program. Okay, that's just a strategy to welcome your students into class. So let's say we want to make a game plan. Okay, so to make a game plan, I can just click and get rid of each one of these things that I wrote earlier. So when I make a game plan for a class, this is just a rundown of what should the students expect. So I might call it game plan for August 17th, 2020. And then I might start putting, okay, we are going to review quiz at the first part of class. Then maybe we are going to have a discussion regarding any obstacles. And then you can put whatever items that you want to on here. A lot of times this is a way to set expectations for your students. And then finally at the start of class, it's really good to have an icebreaker. It doesn't mean everybody just has to introduce themselves, but give them a task. So maybe you play some interesting music and you tell the students to guess the song, or maybe guess the year that it came out. You want to find ways to make your students participate and engage early in class. That's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to want to participate in other activities throughout class sessions.
In this next section, we're going to talk about how to present compelling content using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. So when you're using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra or other online platforms, there are some guidelines and strategies for delivering your visual content. So first off, consistency. Like you'll notice throughout this entire presentation, there's a consistent look, consistent colors being used. You want to make things consistent for your students so they can develop a routine. That deals with the visual part, but you can even think about that with how they enter a class session too. So that's really important. And keep in mind, you can pick a theme, just stick to it. You could use a PowerPoint theme. And there's also other themes that are out there that you all can find online as well. And feel free to try things out. Another thing is make sure use contrasting colors. Make it really easy for people to read it. Don't use two colors on top of each other that make it difficult to be able to see something. Remember that your students read left to right. The reason that this matters is because you want to think about what are the students going to look at first when they look at a slide. So for example, if you take a look at this slide here, you'll probably notice that your eyes naturally gravitated towards the left-hand side of the slide at first. And that's just because in our culture, we read from left to right. Okay. Make sure to space out your information. Don't overload your students along the way when it comes to images, video, text. Try to avoid putting large paragraphs on slides. You want the students to be engaging with the content you're speaking about rather than just staring at something else. Okay. Make sure that your delivery of content is clean and simple. Your students might be looking actually on a 4-inch screen in some instances, if let's say they're having to use something like their cell phone. As we could see something like that here. They might actually be using this. But also some students might be looking at it on a 70-inch television as well. So those are some things to think about. Revealing information. Don't feel like you have to give out all the information every single slide. You might make it where you have consecutive slides so that the content is revealed over time. One thing with Collaborate Ultra is that it doesn't really do well if you try to load in a PowerPoint and have a lot of transitions. That might create some problems for your students. Also consider how you chunk out content. Okay, so use section headers like you saw here where you had presenting compelling content as a section header in the slide before this. Okay, make sure to have distinct headings and subheadings. This is going to make it easier for your students to consume the information that you are putting out there for them. Okay, make sure pace yourself throughout the presentation. Take those few seconds and embrace the silence. Ask questions and give the students time to respond. If you always respond right away, then the students might not feel like they need to always say things directly to you right away. They might think that you will just give them the answer and that they don't need to take the time to really reflect on maybe what was discussed in class or maybe homework that they had worked on beforehand. You'll also want to make sure you have time markers. So if you want to be at a certain point of the presentation, you want to make sure that you hit that mark. Sometimes I use a smartwatch to do that. That's just one way of trying that out. You'll also want to probably print out the presentation in case you need to jump ahead or if you run into any sort of technical mishaps with your files along the way. So you'll even see in this instance, I actually have a second monitor on this side just so I have my notes sitting here for me in case I come up with any questions along the way. So these are just some good visual aid guidelines and delivery strategies that I recommend you try to work on using this fall. And it's okay. Use a little at a time until you get more comfortable with it in your delivery of course content. So now let's talk about virtual presence. This is something that we've all been thrown into where we need to think about how we look and sound when it comes to doing presentations in a virtual format. So first off, we need to think about our attire in terms of what are we wearing. So in this instance, you see I'm wearing a Valdosta State polo. My students are only going to be able to see basically from the waist up. So that's just something to think about there. You'll also want to think about your nonverbal gestures. You might want to use your hands sometimes, but make sure that it's for a specific point. Okay, so some people are really good at doing this. But that's just something to practice, and you might even want to record yourself to see if you maybe move too much side to side at times, or have what I like to call the lizard lick, where you accidentally do something like that sometimes, okay? Tone. Think about which words you emphasize, and try to practice that because a lot of times our students are going to take those as cues of what do we really need to pay attention to in some presentations. We also want to think about pace. Sometimes we need to slow it down. Other times we might try and speed up, but make sure we don't ever leave our students behind. Some students might not be as willing to use the raise your hand feature in, let's say, Blackboard Collaborate Ultra to say, hey, Dr. Walker or Dr. Johns, you're going a little too fast for me. You also have to think about eye contact. This is really difficult when it comes to virtual learning because we are looking directly into our cameras. I would recommend elevating your laptop to help you with this. So in this instance, I actually have a ream of printer paper beneath my laptop to bring it up closer to eye level for me. We also want to think about body language. If you seem really just relaxed, kicking back, your students might not engage with you. So make sure to think about that when you're delivering content. Again, embrace the silence. It's tough, but it works. And also think about your lighting in your background. So make sure do not have windows behind you. I always recommend actually have windows in front of you. So in this instance, actually, I am looking directly at a window right now, and that's making it so that I appear lit. if the window's behind me, I'm going to look very dark. And also think about what's behind you. You might even want to put some things that are relevant to what you're doing. So these are just awesome strategies to think about with your virtual presence. All right, everyone. So we've gone over a bit of content so far. So I want you to take 5 minutes and write on a separate piece of paper a summary of what you've learned so far from this training. I'd like you to write this from memory and don't look back at any previous slides or notes that you've made so far in this presentation. So now that we've done one active learning strategy, now we're going to move on to working on engaging our students beyond our presentations. So we're going to be looking at active learning techniques that go beyond the classic lecture structure. So first we're going to start off in Blackboard Collaborate Ultra by taking a look at the sharing content feature. So if you go to the purple marker right down here, remember that this is the teacher side. The right side of your screen is going to represent the student side. So if I click here on the Open Collaborate panel, and then you go to this icon right here and click Share Content, the options that are available for you are to share a blank whiteboard, to share an application or screen, and then also to share files. The sharing camera feature would just make it so that students could see me or whoever you are as the instructor for a given course. Before we dive too far into the sharing content function, I want to speak about some limitations that have come up with Collaborate Ultra along with other video sharing platforms. So first off, the whiteboard. It can't be viewed well on all mobile devices. It doesn't mean that there's not some functions that work, but just keep that in mind with your students. Next, when you're working with the sharing application or desktop screen, remember they can see everything on your desktop. One way around this is to consider maybe connecting a second monitor and then putting the internet tabs or maybe other documents over onto that other monitor so that you can control what the students are going to see. We'll also have some resources at the end to talk about how to share PowerPoints and other videos toward the end of the presentation. Another thing to think about is file size. I would recommend keeping your file sizes under 60 megabytes, represented by the acronym MB. The reason for this is because the larger the files, the more bandwidth that is going to be required from your students and yourself. If your students don't have a really fast internet connection, this could mean that they could run into delays of receiving files, and you might be talking about content and they have not even received it just yet. So that's just something we really need to think about. In addition, you may also want to ask your students to only turn on their cameras when they're speaking, because this could also affect their internet connection and just their experience in your class. So with sharing content, there's a lot of opportunities for active learning exercises. So here are 3 examples that we are going to go over, and I'm going to show you how to do these inside of Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. Remember that the left side of the screen, when you see it, is going to represent the teacher view, while the right side of the screen is going to represent the student view. The 3 activities that we're going to work on with the Whiteboard tool are going to be concept mapping, a graffiti board, and then a complete a sentence exercise. So the first exercise we're going to take a look at using the Whiteboard tool is going to be concept mapping. Remember that on the left-hand side of the screen, it's going to represent the instructor view, while the right-hand side of the screen is going to represent a student view. Just so you know the student view, I am using a tablet to do this. So this is actually going to show you all some of the limitations, and I'll speak about those along the way. So we are going to share a whiteboard as the instructor. So I'll click right here. Okay. So you'll see that both the student and the teacher can see this whiteboard. So we'll start off with a concept mapping activity. I'm sure many of you have built concept maps before. So we'll just start off with one that's pretty simple. Why don't we just type in Georgia? So I'm going to make a shape. All right, so I'm going to make a circle here. And I'm going to click right here and just type in Georgia. Or better yet, what makes you think of Georgia? Okay. Can use the select tool and move items around. Okay, I'm going to move mine to the center, and I'm going to grab the circle, bring that over here. Okay, so both the student and the teacher can see this. So when I go over to the mobile side, I can use the shapes function and create a line. All right, and then let's connect that line using our selector tool, like so. So one limitation when it comes to tablets is the type function doesn't work as well on there. So I'm gonna actually have to write this in with a pencil. So I'm going to write peaches. Okay, please don't mind my calligraphy, since I can only use my finger when it comes to drawing on this iPad. But there's different ways that you all could do this as well. I could actually share maybe different content to it. I could maybe just draw what I'm interested in. You could even use the pointer function so that the students know exactly what you're trying to point at times. So these are just some exercises that you could try and use when it comes to using the whiteboard function. I'm sure everybody in their respective disciplines can think of some different ways that they would try to build a concept map using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra with the share content function. So now we need to take a look at how do we delete things. So you can use the eraser function and that will erase every single thing that's on the whiteboard. If you want to just delete certain content, if you use the select tool, click on the content, okay, and then just press delete, that'll get rid of that, okay, like so. Or if you click the entire eraser, you'll notice it's going to clear the entire whiteboard. So the next active learning activity we're going to take a look at is going to be the graffiti board. And the point of this is that you would state the main topic for a lesson, and then you would allow the students to use the whiteboard to write a short graffiti style phrase that illustrates their thoughts about the topic. Okay, it could be one of those things where you say, hey, just give me one word that you believe describes this topic, or maybe your feelings on this topic. Okay, so here's an example. State your feelings on what it is like to use Instagram story to cover an event. Okay, and one thing some of you might have noticed there is that the text does not appear on the students' screens until we decide as the instructor to hit the enter key. So, gonna put this in the middle of the screen. And then from there, students could start writing certain words. So for example, I could maybe write it on this tablet. Maybe the word short. Okay. You could even tell students to maybe express their feelings using a smiley face. Okay. It might seem kind of simple and maybe a little goofy to do things this way, but the thing is you're requiring action out of your students. All right. And I'm sure many of you could probably think of different ways to be able to use this, where, for example, maybe you use shapes. You might be able to use more of the text function if more of your students are not using tablets to do this. Just note that my instructor station, this is just a laptop. So this platform does work fairly well with laptops. So now we're going to erase what we did on these slides. And one thing before I click this button that I do want to make everyone aware of is that if you want to save some of these images, make sure to take a screenshot of this or any other elements inside, because there's not really an archive that's built in. The only way to have a true live archive would be to come over to this open session menu and make sure you click to start recording. Okay, so that will record the video of the entire lecture, and this can be helpful especially if you need students that can't make it on a particular day and you want them to be able to go back and see what occurred during a class period. Okay, so I'm going to click the clear function. So the next active learning activity that we are going to take a look at is called complete a sentence. Okay, so before class begins, an instructor would decide what sentence they would like students to complete. Typically, it's going to be something that's content related that helps students focus on what the class is going to be about that day. Some sentences could be, what would you most like to learn about X topic? What have you found most puzzling about this X topic? So one example for an actual sentence would be, one thing I already know about today's topic is blank. One thing I hope I learned today is blank. Okay, so here's how you could maybe go about doing this in something like Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. Okay, so we'll write a sentence. So one thing I already know about Georgia is blank. One thing I hope to learn today is blank. Okay. So students would see this, and you would need to provide some instructions to them. So the instructions may state something like this. Please write a message to me as the instructor, so Colin Walker, so that I am the only one who sees your message. Okay. The reason I said the instructor is because sometimes students may not be comfortable admitting that they don't know about a particular topic as well. So this is kind of a way to kind of build trust between yourself and those students. So if I'm on the student side now, okay, remember that's going to be on the right hand side of the screen. I'm going to go to the chat function over here. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to type in Colin Walker. And this way they know that this message is only going to me. So one thing I already know about Georgia is, let's see, it's really hot during the summer. One thing I hope to learn today is, what is the impact of the heat on food crops? I'll press enter. And right there, you see now that the student has participated. So in the instructor view, you go to the chat, and then you would see each one of your students on here. This is a way to make sure that your students are actually participating during class. Okay, I would recommend doing this every once in a while, maybe every 15 minutes or so during your class period, just to make sure people are engaged with what you're discussing and to make sure they're there, to be honest, too. So this is just another active learning activity that you can use with the whiteboard function inside of Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. Finally, I'm actually going to stop sharing this whiteboard, and you do that right here. Okay, so let's talk about the quizzing and polling functions inside of Collaborate Ultra. So if you go back to our sharing content icon right here, click that, and then you're going to see the secondary content called polling. So with the polling, you have the ability to ask multiple choice questions and then also yes or no questions to your students. All right, everybody, so let's take a look at how to use the polling process as an active learning technique. So I'm going to go to polling, and what I would recommend is maybe start off class by asking a question that will gauge whether or not the students maybe understood a concept or maybe did the reading if, let's say, you had that required for homework from your students. Okay, so when you're building one of these polls, the students can't actually see it, okay, until you launch the poll itself. So here's the question I'm going to ask. Who invented the printing press? Maybe this would be in one of your 1000 level courses. So I'll put maybe Thomas Edison, Johann Gutenberg, and Alexander Graham Bell. And when you press start, you'll see it pop up on the right hand side of the screen representing the student view. Okay? So they have to make a choice. So in this instance, if the student selects Johann Gutenberg, okay, you'll see that at least one response has happened. You may wonder, well, how do I know what student said what? If you go back to your attendees view down here, you'll see a little number 2 pops up, and that corresponds to the selection from the students. This is a good way to find out if your students, if there's a large number of your students that maybe are struggling with a particular concept, if you find that a lot of students are answering one answer and the rest of your students have a very, very different answer that you know is incorrect, that might be a sign that you might need to speak more about that topic or figure out a different way to approach that topic to help more students understand it so you can move forward in the course so the students can improve upon their learning. If you want to show the students what each person answered in terms of the numbers of responses, but not who did what, you can click Show Responses. In this instance, it will show how many people responded. And the reason it says there's one no response is actually it counts me as an attendee who did not respond. So that's how you could use the polling feature as an active learning activity inside of Collaborate Ultra. So now we need to end our poll. To do that, you go to the stop icon right here. Before you do that, though, if you need to save the results, make sure to take a screenshot of that. So I'm going to click End Poll. So now I want to talk about a different active learning technique. Think about if you want to have the students work with each other and maybe in smaller groups. There's a way to do that. So you go to your Share Content tab once again, and you click Breakout Groups. So inside the breakout groups, you're going to notice that normally a couple groups are automatically created for you. You'll notice that you and all your students will be in the main room. You'll also see this box labeled Allow Attendees to Switch Groups. If this box is checked, students can move around to whatever group that they want to. So, with these, I can actually name the groups too. So if you wanted to have, let's say, Team Green, Team Blue. And you'll see, I can be making these groups without my students seeing them, so you can think ahead a bit. So let's say we're going to put our example student into Team Blue. When I launch the breakout groups, it's going to appear on both the student screen and the instructor screen. So we'll click Start, and then you'll see these both appear. And the person knows, the student knows that they are in Team Blue. Okay, so in Team Blue, if the student goes to the Share Content tab, he or she could actually share whiteboards. The share application, it's probably not available because of it being on a tablet. They can also share files and things of that nature too. And you may say, well, what could I do as an instructor? So if let's say that you as the instructor want to go into Team Blue, you can using this icon right here. I can enter in, and then I could share a file. Okay, so let's see. I could share a little meme. And ask them to think on that for a little while. Okay, so as the instructor, I can then go back to breakout groups, and I can put myself, let's say, into a different room. Okay. So I can go back, I can go over to Team Green, let's say we have students there, but you'll notice that my students will still see the file that I left there for them. So this could be a really useful tool, and you could put the files in there before ever starting the breakout group as well. So just some things to think about there. All right. So now we've got Team Green right here. I could also share something to them as well if I wished. You can then move the students around if you need to as well. Okay, so I could go back in here. I can, let's say, take the other student and just move him over to team green and update that, and it will just push the student over to where you want them to be. So breakout groups are really cool to use. They don't save your files after you end them though, so it's really important that if you want the students to track progress on things, that you instruct them to download the content before they leave. Okay, if you may run into issues trying to put the files in there before the groups actually begin. So if you end up having to put your files in there when the student's already in there, you might want to get into a habit of preparing that in advance for your students. One thing to add is to make sure that you end your breakout groups, and to do that so that you can bring everyone into the main room, you're going to click on this stop symbol right here. And then you'll notice everybody is now back into the main room, and you saw that connecting notification was brought up there for you as well as the instructor. In the breakout groups, another item that you may want to consider is having the students participate using specific conversation roles. This could actually be done in the main room of the discussion too, depending on the size of your class. However, if you have a really large class, you may want to assign groups for students to do this. So some roles that students might play are devil's advocate. You could have a speculator, a clarifier, a democratic champion, a scholar, and also a connector as well. You'll see definitions for each one of these roles on the side. Some of your students may actually just be looking on and seeing this as it happens. You could have students actually even peer evaluate each other to see how well they do with a particular role. In the next set of slides, I'm going to show you how to actually adjust some of the permissions so that students can actually leverage some control in being able to share certain content, just like an instructor. So students can be given different roles inside of breakout groups or just the main discussion room inside of Collaborate Ultra. To do that, you're going to click on these three dots right here. Okay, and you'll see for our students, they can either be a moderator or they can be a presenter. They are participants by default inside of Collaborate Ultra. In the next slides, I'm going to show you the different permissions that are given to students that are given each one of these roles. So you want to choose wisely with each of your students of how you use these tools. So let's first talk about assigning the moderator role. You could assign that to your students, or maybe even a guest if you had a guest speaker come in. So with the moderator role, they have control over all the content that's going to be shared. They're going to see things like hand raise notifications. So if a student wants to raise their hand, they click the little hand raise icon, and then you notice a student's hand is there. As the instructor, we can lower that hand. All right, because we have moderator functions, as shown with my name up at the top of the chat window, as you see right here. They can also remove attendees from a session, but they cannot remove other moderators. So a student can't become a moderator and then kick you out of your own class session. They can also adjust session settings, including what the participants can and cannot do. Moderators also get links to their session recordings as well. So that's something to keep in mind if you record your video session for the students. Okay, so to do that, you just click the ... and that's how you'd make your student into a moderator. And you'll see that they're even being told that they are now a moderator. When you want to remove them from being a moderator, just make them back into a participant. So that's just one of the roles that we can work with inside of Collaborate Ultra. Another role that you may want to use with either guest speakers that come in or your students is likely going to be the presenter role. So to assign that, you click on your ... and you're going to see Make Presenter. So the presenter role is going to allow the student or the guest speaker to present items so they can upload, share, and edit content. They can also see the hand raise notifications and lower hands. What they cannot do is remove anybody from a session or adjust the session settings. So this is a way to provide some control while also maintaining some control as the moderator over the session. You want to avoid that giving away that moderator role just for the fact that it could really derail a class fairly quickly. So that's just something to think about when you're considering which role to have each one of your students or maybe a guest speaker in for a particular class session using the Collaborate Ultra platform. So one of the final roles that you can provide to a student or anyone else in your class is going to be that of a participant. Okay? With a participant, they do have some control over things. So as you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, this is the student view. If I click on the gear at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you'll notice that if I go to notification settings, a student can make some adjustments over what they do and do not see in some instances. So some students may want more notifications than others when it comes to doing their Collaborate Ultra session. So for example, they might not want to hear every single time somebody posts a chat message. They can control that. That gives them some ability to customize things for themselves. You may not want your browser to pop up with a notification when people potentially post something. We all probably have a lot of those notifications, and I'm sure students find it just as annoying as many of us do as instructors as well. So those are the three roles that you can provide to anyone that you decide to have as part of your Collaborate Ultra session for class. So let's talk about a few more active learning techniques that you can try using inside of Collaborate Ultra. So the first one would be an open-ended seminar. So maybe the students have already engaged with a particular text or assignment, and you want the students to think out loud and talk about their thoughts or maybe other ideas that have come up as a result of completing a particular assignment. So if you have a class of almost 30 people, that can become a little bit difficult sometimes. So if I'm a student, in that lower right-hand side, I have that Collaborate window. I would go to my chat function, and this way I can see everybody. So I need to open mine as the instructor. So if we ask questions to students about, for example, what did you learn most from this particular assignment? Well, if I go to this attendees view, I'll see each one of my students raising their hands. Okay, and this makes it so that not everyone talks over each other. If you allow people to just everyone open their mics, they could all begin speaking over one another, which is something to be really careful about. So if a student raises their hand, they would click on the little hand raising icon, and you get a notification as the instructor. This makes it so that you know who has raised their hand. Okay, and you can then lower their hand after you have called on them to ask them to speak. They can also lower their own hand, as was just done right here. Okay, you can also mute participants if need be. So if you see that mic icon is on, you could actually go over there into this little ... function, and it would make it so that you could mute them. It's hard to demonstrate that here in this asynchronous manner without causing a significant feedback loop, as I discussed earlier. You also can see at the top, you could mute everybody. If you have, let's say, 20 students trying to talk, this is a way to mute everybody all at the same exact time and then explain how you want class to move forward. This is going to be part of netiquette, which a lot of students might not be used to. Okay? Just as we as instructors are getting used to using these types of platforms, we also need to work with our students on it too, because they're also sort of new to it as well. Another active learning technique that we can look at is an entry ticket. An entry ticket typically consists of 2 to 3 questions that we as instructors prepare before class. A lot of times we use these to gauge what a student remembers from the previous class, or maybe from an assignment that we ask them to complete for homework. So a way to do this with your students is to maybe share a whiteboard. Okay, and then I'm going to type on my whiteboard, what do you already know about this topic? What experiences have you had with this topic? What would you like to know about this topic? Another question you could potentially ask if you want to relate it to last class, what are the 2 most important things you recall from last class? And what I would recommend is give instructions to the students on the whiteboard too. So not everybody ask the same questions, because maybe people come in a minute or 2 late at the start of class because maybe they had internet issues. So please provide your answers in private chat messages to me. Remember to search for my name, Colin Walker, in the chat window. Okay, so as the student, I will then go find Colin Walker. So I don't know anything about this topic. A student should be comfortable saying that. Okay, and you as the instructor, you could maybe then at this point send a message to that student of maybe try and focus on some of the examples discussed in the homework assignment. This is a way for you and your students to have a discussion with each other that doesn't have to be public knowledge to everyone. So a lot of times that represents our one-on-one time that we have with students that maybe isn't as easy to have on an online platform like Collaborate Ultra. So this is an alternate option that we can all do so that we can remain socially distanced and safe and healthy. So with this, you would be able to quickly skim the answers from your students to kind of get an idea of how well that they did with the content. And if there's certain things that you need to emphasize more than others during your class session. So this is just a good technique for doing that, and I strongly recommend it. So the next active learning technique that I want to discuss is the exit ticket. The exit ticket is very similar to the entry ticket. So we will clear out our whiteboard. All right. And then you'll prepare some questions ahead of time once again, but you may ask things like, what is the most important thing that you remember from today's class? What was a light bulb moment today? Similar to when you had the students send private chat messages, I would recommend doing that again here. You might actually have the students say it publicly too, if you want students to kind of feed off one another to see if it kind of gives reminders to people. The reason I like to use this technique is because it's a way to gauge how well did I do as a teacher today. If I find that maybe the thing that I wanted to communicate as being the most important did not come across that way, then that might mean I need to clarify something in the next class period. So once again, just another tool that you can use inside of Collaborate Ultra. Now I would like each one of you to participate in an active learning exercise by completing an exit ticket for this webinar. I would ask that each one of you send an email to colwalker@valdosta.edu with answers to these questions. First, what was the light bulb moment for you during the training? Second, what specific tool or teaching technique for engaging students with Collaborate Ultra would you potentially implement during the fall semester? And finally, what questions do you still have after this training? I really appreciate you all taking the time to participate in this webinar. I hope it was helpful, and I wish all of you the best of luck for those of you who are working with Collaborate Ultra. Hi, I wanted to provide some additional resources for those of you who want to learn more related to Collaborate Ultra or just learning about online delivery in general. So there's a PDF that's going to be attached in BlazeView titled Best Practices for Best Experience. There's also a link for looking at advanced features inside of Collaborate Ultra. With that, just keep in mind if the view doesn't look exactly the same, please feel free to contact eLearning because we have some features available, but we might not have a particular feature available. We have a PDF related to the science of virtual presence. We have some slide design tips, and then we also have some tech information related to Collaborate Ultra, because remember, students, depending on which platform they are using, whether it be their mobile device, a tablet, or a desktop, they might have different ways that they can and can't interact with certain features inside of Collaborate Ultra. Again, I appreciate you all taking the time to review this content today, and I look forward to seeing all of your work in the near future. Take care.